Hi there, this is episode 97 of Prague Talk, a podcast from Radio Prague International. My name is Ian Willoughby. My guest this time is Peter Zusi, Associate Professor of Czech and Comparative Literature at the University of London. The US-born academic has a new book coming out next month, The Integrity of the Avant-Garde, Karel Teige and the Biography of an Ambition. And ahead of its release, we discussed Peter's interest in Teige, as well as his own teaching work and the teenage band he was in with the future Hollywood star. Find out who that was in this episode of Prague Talk. Peter, you're from New York. What led you to Czech?
Cherchez la femme. My wife is Czech, and I was in graduate school when we met. And I actually was doing comparative literature and primarily German literature. But then when I was working on my dissertation, we decided we would live in Prague because it was possible. And we figured events would take us back to the States afterwards. And then when I was there, I just started poking around among certain authors who became interesting to me. And I ended up including one chapter in my dissertation that was on Karel Teige and Czech avant-garde. And then when I finished, the first job I got was in Czech literature. And it's, as they say, all history from there.
But it must have been a major challenge to get your Czech language skills up to the level that you need for your work in that case.
Yeah, that took a little while, but weekends with my in-laws who speak not a word of any other language helped a lot.
Did you ever consider staying in Prague when you speak about having spent time here doing your dissertation?
Yeah. I mean, I think when I got that first job in the States, it was not a permanent job. It wasn't what they call a tenure track job. So I knew it was just going to be for a couple of years. And then it wasn't funny at the time, but the thing was, after that job had run its course, I was looking for other jobs in Czech literature, which had somehow now become my métier. I sort of had this label over my head saying Bohemist, and it wasn't clear that there was ever going to be another job in an English language university in Czech literature. So we actually moved back to Prague at that time, and I was teaching at NYU in Prague and doing some other things. And at that point, we sort of thought, well, we'll happily just stay in Prague. And that was the idea. And then this job in London opened up and I applied and I got it. And so things went in that direction.
And that was 2007 or something like that?
Yes.
Who do your students tend to be, students of Czech in the UK?
Well, first of all, it has to be said that the number of students who are doing a degree in Czech literature has been dwindling for quite a number of years. There are various reasons for that. I think one of the main ones is that the university fees have been rising over the past 10 years. And I think when university cost £3,000 a year, it was much easier for an 18-year-old to do something quixotic like Czech literature. And when they cost 9,000 to 10,000, they tend to sort of think more carefully about the practicality. So there are fewer and fewer students, and I guess, I don't know if it's ironic or not, but now actually at UCL, I do more and more of my teaching in the comparative literature department, which is what I originally did. And I enjoy bringing in Czech material to those courses. And every now and then I get students sort of cross over and then come from comparative literature and focus on Czech literature stuff. But it's hard to say what draws students to Czech literature. It's more rarely than you might think a family connection. Sometimes it is that, but it's not always that. It is oftentimes just curiosity. It's a modern languages degree, so in that sense has a lot of kind of general benefits. But the classes are much smaller and more intimate, so you get more sort of directed attention. Yeah, I don't know is the short answer. Where do they come from?
Peter, you're just finishing a book, The Integrity of the Avant-Garde, Karel Teige and the Biography of an Ambition. For people like me who are only vaguely aware of the name of Karel Teige, who was he?
He was the central figure in the interwar Czech avant-garde. So the most prominent and best known grouping of artists and writers and painters and theater practitioners and architects was called Devětsil. And Karel Teige was one of the founders of Devětsil, and he very quickly became the main spokesperson for Devětsil. And he himself, he started off as a graphic artist, but he sort of realized that he wasn't good enough to cut it at his own high standards. And he eventually became a sort of theorist and a propagandist of the avant-garde. And he was very well connected. He was a close collaborator with sort of various more widely known figures such as Le Corbusier or André Breton in the 30s. And he was the major figurehead for the Czech avant-garde in the 20s and the 1930s.
Was he also somehow connected with Charlie Chaplin? Did I read that in your introduction to your book?
He loved Charlie Chaplin. There was no actual connection, but Chaplin for Teige and for most of the Devětsil figures was this inspirational figure. First of all, he was connected with film, which they idealized as a kind of modern medium, both through its sort of technological framework, but also through the fact that it spoke to such a wide range of people. And so Chaplin for them became a sort of figure of a truly kind of popular art, and popular both in the sense of, lots of people like it, but also in the Czech sense of lidové. They almost saw him as a kind of modern folk artist. So they really idealized him, but I don't think Chaplin ever had any idea of this.
How does the Czech avant-garde of that time compare to what was happening in other countries in Europe?
I think it's extremely fascinating and fruitful. So in the 1920s, Teige had sort of two main programs that he was championing. One was constructivism, which was primarily an architectural movement, and that, of course, is not specific to the Czech lands. It's international, and he was taking inspiration from Soviet sources, from German sources, from Dutch sources, and then also, of course, from Le Corbusier. But they also were propagating this program, I use the word sort of advisedly, called poetism, which Teige and Vítězslav Nezval effectively invented, which was not so much any sort of set of particular practices as an openness and an enthusiasm to the modern world, to modern forms of entertainment. This is where Chaplin comes in, and to a kind of joy in the modern world. And for Teige, this apparently paradoxical combination of poetism, which was all about joy and irrational exuberance, and constructivism, which was all about rationality and discipline. For him, this fit together in a way that has made a lot of later commentators think, oh, this is just paradoxical. But for me is absolutely fascinating, because I think he's really touching on different aspects that are lurking in the European interwar avant-garde more generally, but he brings out some of the inner contradictions and tries to reconcile them in really fruitful ways.
Beyond Karel Teige, are there other figures in Czech literature or culture who you have devoted a lot of attention to, or who you find particularly fascinating?
Yeah, Richard Weiner is somebody who I find extremely fascinating, and another project that I've been working on for a long time but haven't brought to an end yet focuses on Kafka and certain Czech writers, and not in the sense of trying to find sort of direct influences, but just going back to my original training in comparative literature, sort of reading Kafka in different company than he usually is read, even though those authors were part of the world that he grew up in. And Weiner is one of the people who's most obviously relevant there. And it's a bit of a cliche at this point, at least among the few of us who really work on Czech and Central European literature, to refer to Weiner as the Czech Kafka. And it's oftentimes a phrase that's dropped in slightly superficial fashion. But I do think that there's a lot to explore there. And Weiner is just, for me, one of the most fascinating 20th century Czech authors. And in many ways still isn't given his due even within Czech literary histories, to my viewpoint. And I think one of the reasons is because he's difficult. He's really quite baffling. And he doesn't fit into a lot of the stereotypes about what Czech literature is supposed to be about, which is in some sense kind of direct and full of humor and sort of Hašek type of immediacy that people can immediately connect with in some way. And Viner takes some work, but he's worth it.
Do you take much interest in contemporary Czech literature? I met you once in London, I guess it was about 5 or 6 years ago, at a book launch of a book by Petra Hulova.
I do. I mean, I think that at an English language university, if you do Czech literature, you don't have the luxury of specializing too much. So, I mean, certainly the bulk of my research is late 19th and early 20th centuries, but I enjoy keeping up as best I can with contemporary authors as well. And certainly I teach them to students whenever I have the opportunity.
To change gear quite a bit, I was really amazed a couple of years ago when I found out via social media that you, in your younger days, had been in a rock band with the comic actor and huge star Ben Stiller. I presume, looking at the photos, it must have been a school band, was it?
We were all in school together. Yeah. I mean, that was junior high through high school. Rock band is a generous word for it. We did very odd music. It remains quite odd to this day. And then, after high school, we all sort of went our own ways and all lost contact for a long time. And in the meantime, then Ben became a huge star and this kind of stuff. And then I reconnected with my oldest friend, best friend, Chris Roebling, who had been at the center of that band. He was really the driving force. And then about a year after that, I got a message from Chris and he said, "You're not going to believe this, but there's this recording studio in Brooklyn. And this guy has found," because we cut a record and we sort of handed it out to record stores in New York in 1982. And this guy found it and was intrigued by it and wanted to release it properly. And he didn't actually know that it was Ben. Then he found that out. And that, of course, became another impetus because our names weren't given in full on the album.
And how old were you when the album was made?
13.
Wow.
Yeah. So it was remastered and re-released. And then, yeah, about 5 years ago, we actually had a concert in Greenwich Village. And it became a little bit of a high school reunion, but it also oddly had quite a number of outside people coming too. It was huge fun.
And what was it like being on stage? Because I saw there's a documentary on YouTube about you guys and your reunion. What was it like being on stage again together as basically middle-aged guys who hadn't played together, presumably, since you were little kids?
It was just incredible fun. There were sort of old friends in the audience who I hadn't seen in many, many years, and then people I didn't know at all. And yeah, it was quite an event. As you say, there's that Pitchfork documentary, which they were filming as we did this, and that was also a lot of fun.
The Integrity of the Avant-Garde, Karel Teige, and the Biography of an Ambition by Peter Zusi is coming out on the 24th of March. Hope you've enjoyed this edition of Prague Talk, a podcast from Radio Prague International. This has been episode 97, so there are, of course, dozens, nearly 100 more out there. If you're new to us and enjoyed this one, why not give them a go and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. But for now, from me, Ian Willoughby, thank you so much indeed for listening to Prague Talk, and talk to you again very soon.